My family's huge sports fans and huge Chiefs fans, even when the Chiefs struggled in the 80s. I didn't know this was unusual. When we'd watch Chiefs games, it took my friends telling me this was unusual. When we'd watch Chiefs games, we would be totally talking during the game. When the commercials would come on, we were totally silent. And we would pay attention to the commercials and we'd debate the commercials afterwards. And it's what everybody does today with the Super Bowl. But I thought that's how everybody watched sports. And my friends who would come over would say, that's the oddest thing. You guys, are the opposite of how everybody else watches the Chiefs games.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun at all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi. I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Steve Bernstein. Steve is CEO of Bernstein-Rein Advertising Incorporated, one of the largest independently owned advertising agencies in the United States. Bernstein-Rein was founded by his father in 1964 and has built enduring category-defining brands for national clients, including Walmart, McDonald's, Hostess, and Blockbuster, while maintaining a deep civic commitment to Kansas City as a core agency value. At age 10, Steve helped inspire his father's creation of the McDonald's Happy Meal, widely regarded as one of the most successful promotions in the history of retailing and quick service restaurants. Over more than 3 decades in the industry, he has built the skills, judgment, and perspective to develop high-performing teams and scalable marketing organizations. He is recognized for helping brands and agencies adapt to changing customer behavior, new technologies, and evolving business demands while maintaining accountability for results. Bernstein holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business and Public Administration from the University of Arizona, as well as an MBA and JD degrees from the University of Missouri in Kansas City. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Steve.
Steve, welcome to the Corporate Couch this morning.
Well, thank you, Jeff. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. You're like a Kansas City legend, and not only that, this is my first interview in 2026. So congratulations on that. I took a little break here.
All right. Well, I don't know about the legend part, but I'm very happy to kick off the year with you. That'll be fun.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to meet you, and I try to do some business with Bernstein-Rein back in the day. So been to your beautiful headquarters in the plaza in Kansas City. So it's all good. Yeah. Let's start with a fun question. I know you've been around the block a few times, and you're active on different social media platforms. But what one thing would surprise people about you, Steve, even people that know you fairly well?
Probably the thing that would surprise people is probably my bobblehead collection. I'm not sure that people know that that's my obsession. I guess I could have worse obsessions. I could be a gambler, a smoker, a drinker. I'm none of those things, but I do have an addiction to bobbleheads. And
what's your most prized bobblehead?
Oh, my most prized is I actually have a set of the Beatles. And it came out in the 60s, so I bought it on eBay, and it's all for the Beatles, and it's really cool, and they're my prized ones. But But I love the Kansas City Royals ones. I love the Chiefs, and I have every Kansas City Royals bobblehead that they have ever given away. So it's
Wow.
yeah. So it's a problem. You ask my wife and how much space it's taking up in the house. It's a problem.
Right. That is funny. Now you have me intrigued. So the Beatles bobbleheads were done in the '60s. So how far does bobbleheads go back in time?
Oh, I should know the answer to that. I think I want to say they started in the 40s or 50s,
Wow.
and you've probably seen some of those like cherub-faced baseball bobbleheads. I think those were some of the first ones. But
Interesting.
anyhow, but the only really old one the older ones I have is just the Beatles. The rest are Royals, but the Royals started theirs in the probably, I think Carlos Beltran was the first one, and I want to say it might have been 2005 or something like that for the Kansas City
Wow.
Royals. But bobbleheads do go back pretty far. They were called wobblers back then.
Wobblers.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, we can do a whole episode on bobbleheads.
Yeah.
But, so I'm also intrigued, like, are they worth money? Like, are some of them like rare, or just because they give them out to, the first 15,000 fans?
Well,
So
right.
they're not
Well,
worth that
I tell my wife that they're worth money, and that's why we have them. But she says you're never going to get rid of them. So, and she's right.
Right.
Yeah. It is funny. If you look at eBay, they do go up in value. And the funny part about it is almost every bobblehead that I'm not that interested in ends up being the one that's very valuable.
Right.
So it could be like Italian Heritage Night at the Royals bobblehead, which is a really cool bobblehead. It's just Slugger wearing an Italian jersey. That one's worth a lot.
That's funny.
Rusty Kuntz. Do you remember Rusty Kuntz was a first base coach for the Royals?
Yeah.
His bobblehead is worth a lot.
Wow.
So
I would figure the Italian bobblehead would be like a mafia pinstripe suit. But
I'm not going there, Jeff. I'm not going there. But it's a fun bobblehead. It's very fun.
I assume you grew up in Kansas City, just based on your legendary. Speaking of legends, your dad. But what was fun for you growing up? What you love doing?
Yeah, I did grow up in Kansas City. My family has actually been in Kansas City for many generations. So we very much feel for the city and love the city. My childhood, I don't know if there was anything spectacular about it. I will say this. My dad was an advertising executive. My mom went to school to become a psychologist. I have a younger brother, younger sister. But the psychologist and the advertising executive, I think our dinner table and our family life would have made a great sitcom, because I think there was always very funny and interesting things going on. And people probably dislike me for this. I'm somebody who loves school. I loved school. I thought school was so much fun, and I actually loved taking tests.
Yeah.
To me, they were like Christmas presents, because you never knew what they were, and you open them up and there's a surprise. And when I tell people that, they roll their eyes and they boo at me. But I like tests, and I like school. I had a good time in school.
So how do you satisfy that yearning, I guess, at being the CEO of Bernstein-Rein?
In advertising and marketing, and I think this is probably true for any career, you got to keep learning, and fortunately, I like doing that. And the greatest thing for me was when TED Talks became an app, and you could watch TED Talks, because I love watching a good 30 to 60 minute TED Talk. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's my favorite. I love watching Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Yeah. So
I don't know if I've seen his TED Talk. I'm a big Tim Ferriss podcast guy, and I first discovered him there on that podcast. So he's a brilliant guy, and he's funny.
My love of school, I think I do try to learn, and I'm not unique in this. I think I do try to learn in every experience, in good experiences and in bad ones. I think there's things to learn. And it works for our industry if you're always keeping your eyes open and ears open for marketing and what drives consumers. Trying to learn all the time, I think, is a plus.
I don't know who has this attributed this quote to, but it's like when you stop learning, you start, you stop living.
Yeah.
Really. I mean,
right.
So
right.
Big fan of that. Did you have aspirations to be in the advertising and marketing business growing up, or what? Or did you have dreams of being an astronaut, a baseball player? What was that for you?
Because my dad, I do believe, is a legend in the advertising business. Somebody, and we could talk about it later if you want to, who created the Happy Meal. And I now run Bernstein-Rein, which he created in 1964. So I get asked that question all the time. Did I know I was going to go into advertising? And I'm not sure I did, but I'm not sure I said my childhood was, not unusual. There maybe were a few things that were unusual. I told you, and maybe you even sense it from the Bobblehead story. I always loved pop culture. And so even as a kid, before there were things like Entertainment Weekly and People Magazine and whatever, I'd ask my dad to bring home Variety Magazine for me. And I mean, that's when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. I
Wow.
used to love reading about Hollywood and all that stuff. So I was really into pop culture, which, I guess could have been something that would have said he's going to end up in advertising or marketing. But I also used to think my family's huge sports fans and huge Chiefs fans, even when the Chiefs struggled in the 80s. I didn't know this was unusual. When we'd watch Chiefs games, it took my friends telling me this was unusual. When we'd watch Chiefs games, we would be totally talking during the game. When the commercials would come on, we were totally silent. And we would pay attention to the commercials and we'd debate the commercials afterwards. And it's what everybody does today with the Super Bowl. But I thought that's how everybody watched sports. And
Right.
and my friends who would come over would say, that's the oddest thing. You guys, are the opposite of how everybody else watches the Chiefs games. But I don't know if I knew I was going to go into advertising. It was always around me, even though I started in Bernstein-Rein 34 years ago. I'll turn 60 this year. I tell people that my history with Bernstein-Rein and my institutional knowledge of the company goes back, probably 50 years as far as my memory will go back, because I remember things being around the agency all my life. And so I really grew up around it. But I got my education at University of Arizona, and I loved it there. It was not my first choice of colleges. I told you I loved school, and I made decent grades, so I wanted to go to Stanford, but I think everybody wants to go to Stanford. I did not get into Stanford, but I really wanted to go out west. And I was visiting my uncle in Arizona, and he lives in Phoenix, and he had gone to University of Arizona in Tucson. And he said, "You're out here. You ought to drive 100 miles down to Tucson from Phoenix to Tucson and see the campus. You'll love it." And I knew nothing about it, and he wasn't a rah-rah guy, but we went down there, my dad and I. It was November. November in Kansas City can be cold and snowy, and we show up on the campus, and I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's lined with palm trees, and there's good-looking people laying out on beach towels and playing Frisbee and all that. And a light bulb went off in my head in that, hey, this could be the place for me. And I remember saying
Right.
to my dad, "Can I go here?" And he's like,
Right.
"Well, if you make good enough grades, I'll support you in it." So I tell everybody I went to University of Arizona for all the wrong reasons, but I loved it, and I got a great
Yeah.
education, and I'm still involved with the university, and consider myself a wildcat for life. But from there, even though I majored in marketing, I continued my education at UMKC, University of Missouri Kansas City, here in Kansas City.
Right after you graduated from
Yes,
U of A?
right after I
Okay.
graduated. I was on a roll, and I knew if I stopped, I probably would never start up again.
The love of taking tests
Yeah, and I
and
loved taking the
school.
test, and I loved taking the bar admissions test and all that stuff. I thought was great. And so I got my law degree and my MBA from UMKC, and for a short time thought that my career would be in law. And so we worked with a law firm here in town that doesn't exist anymore, but they were a downtown law firm called Lindy Thompson. And I got my first job with them. I have to say, they were a great place. I didn't like it very much.
Right.
It just was not for me. They used to tell me that it wasn't really for me either. So it probably went
Right.
both ways. I think one of the funny things back then, it was the 80s. No, it was early 90s. It was 91. And people used to wear coat and ties for sure to law firms. And I wore my coat and tie just like everybody else did. But my ties were always very colorful. And that was the reason they told me that I didn't really fit into the law firm. They said, "You don't really
Incredible.
fit in. Your ties are really far out there." And it's just funny to think back to those times. But
Oh my goodness. Oh, that is funny. So talk about that though. I mean, like, why law? Like, was it a combined law degree MBA program?
yeah, well, now it's a combined program, JD MBA. It was just kind of the two, and so it saved me a semester or two. But I loved the thinking that law brought. I loved the way it makes you think about things. But yet, I was always drawn to business. So it made sense that the law classes I were taking were business classes. And then I was interested in more business classes. So I actually took the MBA after, concurrent, but at the end and then after my law degree at UMKC. And really enjoyed it, and had an interesting teacher. I don't know if you remember back this would be in the 80s, but there used to be a quick serve restaurant, specialty restaurant called TJ Cinnamon's. Do you remember TJ
Oh
Cinnamon's?
yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
actually started here in Kansas City by a guy named Ted Rice. And Ted Rice taught an entrepreneurial class at UMKC. And I remember taking that class from him. And he at that time, TJ Cinnamon's was everywhere. So this was a big deal to be able to take a class with him. And it was interesting.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good when the professor who teaches entrepreneurial classes is an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah, but I will tell you something I still laugh about Ted, and Ted just passed away recently, but I don't agree with this, but he used to say, okay, you're going to do all these things as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and you're going to have finance people around you, and the finance people are going to create your financial reports. All you need to do, and he'd say this in class, is look at the financial reports, nod your head a lot, and ask a couple questions, and then just move on. He was not very focused on the finances of his business. And, TJ Cinnamon's doesn't exist anymore. I often wonder whether that's the reason that he didn't pay enough attention to it.
Right.
But he was a great guy and a really passionate business leader.
Yeah. So how long did you last at the law firm?
I used to say I was the world's youngest retired attorney because I lasted for 3 months. I was an attorney for 3 months. And
wow.
And so it wasn't very long at all. And I had my opportunity because two things happened at once. One, in the law firm, in the early 90s, large law firms were having trouble because the real estate market had crashed. And there were a lot of law firms that had been based on kind of that real estate portfolio as well. And Lindy Thompson was one of those. And so Lindy Thompson dissolved at that time. And so I had an opportunity then to either continue with some lawyers as they splintered off into some other directions, or our advertising agency, Bernstein-Rein, had just picked up the Blockbuster video account. And Blockbuster video was going like crazy. And we had an opportunity as a family to become a franchisee, not just the marketer for Blockbuster, but to actually own some stores and grow some stores. So my dad, being an entrepreneur, took that opportunity and he purchased 6 stores in Albuquerque, New Mexico, although there's a fun story that leads up to that if you want it. And we ran those stores for a couple years. We thought because we were good marketers, we'd be good operators, and that was not the case in the first couple of years. We were not good operators. But because we weren't good operators, and because I told you I was really into pop culture and I didn't fit in the law firm, my dad said to me, I was probably 22 at that time, how would you like to move down to Albuquerque, New Mexico and run our Blockbuster stores? And I loved movies, as I said. I loved pop culture. I loved the West, particularly the Southwest. And it gave me a chance to grow as a leader outside of my dad's shadow as well. So I had a huge opportunity, probably one that, was, very fortunate to have, that not other people have that opportunity. Here's a Blockbuster operation and we need somebody to run it. And my dad asked me to move to Albuquerque, and I did. And
I'm going to make you rewind because now I do want to hear the story of how you, the interesting story of how you guys purchased the 6 stores in Albuquerque.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you that quickly. So Bernstein-Rein has always handled a lot of franchise and multi-unit retail and quick serve restaurants. We have been with McDonald's, although it ended recently, for 55 years. And so we'd always seen how these entrepreneurs had done really well in these franchise businesses, particularly McDonald's. But there was no chance to become a McDonald's owner. We were their marketing group, and they did not want us to be an owner of McDonald's stores. But Blockbuster in the early years were a lot of early McDonald's people. So it was actually at one time even called kind of McVideo. People used to joke around about that. And we picked up the account nationally. And in a competitive review, even though they only had like 30 stores at the time, they were actually purchased by a great entrepreneur by the name of Wayne Huizinga. And Wayne Huizinga had actually made his money in waste management, so renting dumpsters in New Jersey. And he really fell in love with the idea of renting videos in a company that he saw down in Dallas called Blockbuster Videos. But anyhow, we became their advertising agency, and we thought, you know what? One, we could be a better agency by running some Blockbuster video stores and really knowing the customers the same way our client does by actually running them and owning and operating. We could test things out. We could shoot commercials there. We'll know the problems that they go through. And what we'd seen at McDonald's, the McDonald's owners did very well. Maybe as a Blockbuster owner, we'll do very well too. And Blockbuster was open to that. So they agreed to let us be a franchisee for Blockbuster. But the funny part of the story is Blockbuster was at the time the fastest growing company in the United States. And we were doing this for them, Bernstein-Rein. We were grand opening a store for them every 18 hours for a 3-year period. I mean, it was crazy. There was always a grand opening, and they were all doing well. And Wayne Huizinga, the owner, he would hand out the franchisees to what we would call FOWs, Friends of Wayne. It was only people, it was a favor. You were being anointed to be a franchisee. Now, they'd agreed that we could have a store, but we got very aggressive at the time. And we said, you know what? Why don't we take all of Kansas City? And so we wrote a letter to Wayne saying there were no Blockbusters in Kansas City at the time because it was just starting. We said we'd like the whole territory of Kansas City. Well, when Wayne saw that, he was very upset. We were the marketing agency. We weren't one of his friends at the time. How dare you ask for Kansas City? Kansas City will always be a corporate market, and I'm not sure I even want to do business with you as a marketing firm anymore. I mean, we thought we'd lost the account because we overstepped this privilege that we had to get a Blockbuster video store. And luckily, we did not lose the account, but Wayne's people eventually said, well, we acquired some stores in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was a conversion. They were called Video Palace. We're going to turn them into Blockbuster. How would you like to run those stores? And we said yes. We knew nothing about Albuquerque, but it was the opportunity again, and that's why we ended up in Albuquerque. And I'll tell you this, and I hope there aren't Albuquerque listeners out there, but I love the state of New Mexico. I did not like living in Albuquerque at all.
Yeah.
I did not like Albuquerque. The state is beautiful and wonderful, and we were all over the state as we grew. But as a 20-something-year-old, it was not the greatest city to grow up in.
Yeah. So talk about that. I mean, you're in your early 20s. You're running 6 stores.
Yeah.
That you can get your MBA and you can have a JD in law, but I mean, you're still leading people.
Right.
And where did you learn the lessons of, obviously some of the people are going to be your age, but some of the people are going to be older.
Yeah.
What was your learning process, and any good stories that came out of it that maybe you were embarrassed with at the time, but you learned a lot from?
Well, it was a learning process by fire, for sure. I mean, growing up, I told you I loved school, and I was always in kind of leadership positions in school. I always thought that was cool. My wife today is not impressed by that. She'll tell me, well, the only reason you were in leadership things is nobody else wanted to do it in school. And I think back and I think, you know what, she might have been right about that. But I had taken leadership positions in school, and I did have this law degree and this MBA. And right after I left the law firm, I actually, knowing that I was going to move to Albuquerque, it was about 3 months to train for Blockbuster. And I actually, in North Kansas City, ended up being a CSR, a customer service rep, somebody running the registers at a Blockbuster Video, making minimum wage. I mean, I knew where I was headed, but here I was with a law degree and an MBA, checking people out at a video store in North Kansas City, learning the business before I moved down to Albuquerque. The law degree probably gave me some respect that I maybe didn't even deserve, but people are like, oh, he's a lawyer, he has an MBA, he must know some things. I really didn't. I really didn't know anything, but I ended up moving down to Albuquerque, and I brought with me the manager from the Blockbuster store that I trained with in Kansas City. And his name was Jim Porterfield. And I brought him down with me, and he was my age as well, but he of course knew much more than I did. I'd only worked in the store for a few months. He'd been a manager for a couple of years. And I think we just did things out of being young and not even really knowing what failure was yet. I mean, we just worked our butts off all the time, worked really hard, did things that I don't think I could do today. And the hours we put in, physically building stores and hiring and firing people and all the stuff that went into it. I think it was just being youthful and just going for it. Looking back, I'll also say that Blockbuster was an easy business. It was really, I didn't realize that at the time. I mean, you don't know anything different, but all it really is customer service. People are coming in, they're taking your product, they're bringing it back home, and then they're bringing it back to you. You know, it's not a restaurant. You don't have waste. You can't mess up the recipe. It was an easy business, but I learned a lot. And it was trial by fire, and it was a good way to grow up. And I did that for 5 years.
Yeah. Wow. So, but you came back and basically ran the corporation that ran all the Blockbusters, correct?
Well, no, we started with 6 stores, and growth was everything for Blockbuster. And if you remember the 90s, there ended up being a Blockbuster on every street corner. Well, we grew that Blockbuster operation to over 100 stores, and we actually became Blockbuster's largest franchisee in the system. And it again was a great experience. Everything from finding locations to hiring the staff to terminating people when it didn't work, but also the physical part, which I don't think I could do today. We were literally kind of building the stores ourselves, the shelving and stocking and all that stuff. It again was just a great way to grow, and I ended up running a pretty good sized organization. And even at that time, if they had broken up all the Blockbuster video franchisees, we were something like the 5th or 6th largest video chain in the country. Some of the lessons that I learned in life, I learned through that, and those might be interesting. The first one is the one that I even mentioned was, you think that things are always going to be this good and maybe this easy, and in moments in everybody's life they are that way. But it's not always that way. And as a young 20-something, I thought life's always going to be that we're going to be opening stores. I'm going to be growing every week. There's not going to be any setbacks. You just keep going and going. And Blockbuster, again, video in the 90s was everything. Movie stars, the trade shows that they'd bring you to, the distributors would throw gifts at us that today I couldn't even dream of, like Oscar tickets and invitations to the Playboy Mansion. Again, I'm somebody in my 20s, and they're throwing these things at me in order to get me to buy their product, because video was everything. And the stupid thing, Jeff, that again, learning a lesson and saying that things won't always be this good, I turned down most of those gifts. I didn't go to the Playboy Mansion. I didn't take the Oscar tickets. I thought I'd always have that opportunity. And I'd say the studios, being a tough business person, if you can give us those type of incentives, I'd rather you lowered the cost of the product, because then I can make more margin and I'll make more money. It wasn't true. Those are different sources of revenue for the studios. They have a promotional budget that they use, and it's not going to lower the cost of your goods, and you're not going to have those opportunities. And now I look back and think, I'm never going to get invited to the Playboy Mansion. I'm never going to be able to go to the Oscars. Things that I didn't realize how unbelievable they were, because I was in this industry that was just booming at the time, and everything seemed very easy at that point.
So interesting. So, obviously, Blockbuster is one of those case studies in, various MBA schools in terms of, the success, and then not seeing the future. So what was that like, experiencing that as a, kind of one of the largest franchisee owners?
It is as you mentioned, it's the classic casebook study. It was everything in the 90s. And I'm going to be off on this statistic, but I'm going to be close to it. Blockbuster, because they had so many locations, they were within 70% of the U.S. population were within a 10-mile drive to Blockbuster Video. So had they kept their eye on the ball, they didn't have to disappear. Again, we won't go through all the case study stuff about it, but they could have been the ones that ended up selling videos, and they tried to sell videos. We just weren't good at it. They turned that over to Walmart. Walmart became the place that people bought videos. They could have been Netflix, and there's some great stories in that. where Netflix actually wanted to sell to Blockbuster, and Blockbuster got very arrogant and said, I think the purchase was going to be like a $3 million purchase, and said, no, we'll put you out of business instead of paying that. Well, obviously that was a mistake. I do tell people the whole story itself was a good story. The story, I mean, Blockbusters were great and profitable, and stores used to pay back. You'd be totally into profit after just operating them for 3 years. So if you even thought there were 3 years left in the business, it made sense to still open a Blockbuster store. But the last chapter of the story didn't need to happen. Blockbuster didn't need to disappear. And it was painful. The last years of Blockbuster was very painful. You know, we were the marketing agency for them off and on. Bernstein-Rein came up with the line, make it a Blockbuster night for them, and did a lot of great things for them. But I remember when we weren't the agency and I was just a large franchisee, they had gotten so arrogant that we would sit in meetings and we'd complain that they weren't doing enough marketing. And this wasn't from an advertiser. This was from a franchisee saying, we're not doing enough marketing. And they would come up and say, and this was a report that I remember, a presentation that I very vividly remember. They said, we are the third most popular brand in the world, behind Nike and the McDonald's arches. Our ticket is the third most popular logo in the world. Because of that, we don't need to spend money on marketing. Everybody already knows who we are. Well, Jeff, your background's in marketing. Anybody who's in business, they are in marketing, whether they want to admit it or not. And the fact that you're known, hey, that's a great thing. But the more important thing is that you stay relevant. And that's what Blockbuster lost, is they did not stay relevant. People were tired of taking 2 trips back and forth to the store. They didn't like the late fees. They wanted to watch movies, on that they owned at their home and have access to more. And they just weren't staying relevant to what the consumer wanted. And they could have, but they got very big, very powerful, very successful. And in that arrogance, they stopped paying attention to relevancy. They were well known, but they weren't relevant. And that was the demise of Blockbuster. More than technology or anything else, it was really their own kind of blindness and arrogance.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts. He creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
Go back to your childhood for a second. You mentioned the Happy Meal, and Bernstein-Rein developed that back in the day, but you had a part of that, it sounds like. So talk about that Happy Meal story.
Okay. Yeah, I love the Happy Meal story, and it's a part of Bernstein-Rein's legacy and my family's legacy. It was 1976, and this is hard to remember, but McDonald's was turning from their kind of red and white checkered stores to a brick format that was more adult, and they were really worried about keeping kids in their restaurants. And so that was the thing. How do we get kids to still want to go to McDonald's, because it was becoming too much of a grown-up thing? That went out to all their agencies in the country. We got to find a way to keep kids interested and wanting to go to McDonald's. And I was a 10-year-old boy at the time in 1976, and this is very much true. I was not unusual in any way. I did what any 10-year-old did for breakfast in the morning. In 1976, I used to have cereal for breakfast, and I think every 10-year-old used to do the same thing. And mine used to be Fruit Loops, by the way, until my mom got on this, you can't eat sugar cereal anymore. And so there was...
I was a Captain Crunch guy.
Perfect, except it cut the roof of your mouth, didn't it? When you had... Right. Yeah, but that was part of the pleasure of it, right? You're making me hungry for some Captain Crunch
There we go.
or Fruit Loops. But I used to eat Fruit Loops every morning as a 10-year-old, and I'd put the cereal box in front of me, and I'd read that same cereal box over and over and over again. Hey, can you relate to that?
Oh, 100%.
Right.
I
And that was not unusual. That's what every
yeah.
10-year-old did. So my part was not exceptional, but the exceptional part was probably my dad, who had this assignment from McDonald's, but actually used to see me in the morning doing that same thing, and he'd be frustrated with me, and he would say, "Don't you have anything better to do than look at that same cereal box over and over again? You could read the newspaper, you could read your homework." And I'd say no, as I kept shoveling that Fruit Loops into my mouth and looking at the same box over and over and over again. But from watching me, he realized that kids do like to look at something and play with something when they eat. And so that's where the idea of the Happy Meal came from. And it started here in Kansas City. There were no less than 10 activities on a Happy Meal box. So the kids could play those activities and look at those activities just like I used to look at that cereal box. And there was always a toy surprise. Well, it came with a hamburger, it came with fries, and it also came with the orange drink at that time was what it came with. They don't even have their orange drink anymore. But it always had a toy surprise in it. But the toy was a surprise. It was actually based off Cracker Jacks and how you used to get a Cracker Jack surprise in every box. And that was the Happy Meal. It was much more about the box, always had a prize in it. McDonald's didn't immediately accept it. The franchisees loved it, and it worked really well. And Bernstein-Rein started doing it in Kansas City and Denver and Phoenix. And because that's where we represented some owners, and they loved it. But McDonald's actually didn't think it was the greatest. They I don't know if they wanted it to fail, but they weren't jumping on it the way everybody else was, the way the franchisees wanted to. And so they waited for 3 years before they couldn't deny that the Happy Meal was something that should be added to the menu. And so they added it in 1979, so actually 3 years after it was created. And they celebrate the anniversary as 1979. They then took it over and made it much more about the toy and than the box, but it's still, we like to think it's the greatest promotion that's ever been created, and my dad is the father of that. And I think the numbers are over 1 billion a year. Happy Meals are sold worldwide at McDonald's, over 1 billion a year.
Wow.
And we always joke, my dad has in his office the copyright for the Happy Meal that we sold to McDonald's for $1. That's really what we got from the Happy Meal was $1. We always say if we had taken 0.00001 cent off of every Happy Meal sold, you'd be interviewing me from Hawaii right now, Jeff. So anyhow, but I do like telling the story, and this has become something for my dad. It is amazing, though, how many people try to take claim for the Happy Meal. And we constantly have to tell the correct story because there's a lot of people who have tried to say they created it. But we always go back for proof in that we've got the copyright for it. We've got a trophy from McDonald's at its 25-year anniversary. Thank you for bringing us this tremendous idea. It also was not the first happy thing that my dad created. He also created for McDonald's, which was known then as the Happy Place. He created the Happy Plate, the Happy Lid, the Happy Cup. They just weren't as successful as the Happy Meal. So once you see all those things in his office, it's hard to deny that he was the one who created it. But it is amazing when there's something that successful, how many different stories come out talking about, no, we were the ones that created the Happy Meal.
Obviously a legendary dad, which is a gift for you to learn under leadership lessons from him. But you mentioned Wayne Huizenga. Bernstein-Rein had the Walmart account when Sam Walton was alive, obviously McDonald's with Ray Kroc. Talk about some of the lessons you learned from your dad as well as some of those other pioneers in their industry.
We've been very fortunate that we've been around some of America's greatest entrepreneurs. Sam Walton, who was the creator of Walmart, Ray Kroc, who grew McDonald's, who wasn't the creator of it, but he grew it much like Wayne Huizenga grew Blockbuster Video. We were also around Henry Block. We represented H&R Block for some time. And then my dad is a great entrepreneur in his own right. They were all different. They were all very powerful people. I mean, they had presence in the room when everyone, no matter how big the room was. But the thing that I think definitely linked every one of them is their focus on and their determination on doing what they believed in. The hell with the rest of the world or what everybody else was saying. Sam Walton was going to bring low-cost goods to rural America, small-town America, at all costs because he believed in it. Woolworth, where he was a franchisee, I think, before, who he tried to sell this concept to, they said it would never work. Well, he believed it so much that in Bentonville, Arkansas, he opened one and kept going. And just the hell with anybody saying it wouldn't work, he kept going. Wayne Huizinga, the same thing. When I told you we pitched them when they were just 30 stores, and we thought we'd be very clever showing what the stock could end up being in 5 years or something. So we put together a big pitch, and these numbers won't be right, but we put up a thing saying, and we used local newscasters to do it so it looked like a real news report. 5 years after choosing Bernstein-Rein, Blockbuster stock is at over $100 a share. And we thought that would really, he'd go, wow, that's awesome. Wayne didn't blink. Wayne was shooting for more than $100 a share. He was going to grow this company. The hell with what anybody else said. And he was just focused on getting these things open, and he knew they were right. The same for Ray Kroc in McDonald's. Ray was very driven. There's a movie about him starring Michael Keaton called The Founder.
Yeah, love the movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and it doesn't make Ray out to be the nicest person, if you remember in the movie. Yeah. And my dad will say, from working with him directly, he'll say, well, it was kind of true. It wasn't that he wasn't nice. He was just so focused on this thing being successful, nothing was going to get in his way. And really, the same was true for Henry Block here in Kansas City. And anybody who knew Henry was the nicest person you will ever meet. Lived into his 90s here and was a great philanthropist in Kansas City as well. So you didn't have to be ruthless, but you did have to be so dedicated and so focused that it didn't matter what anybody else said. And I think that's the thing that's true for a great entrepreneur. And I think those entrepreneurs, every one of them, it wasn't all success. You have to keep that faith. You have to keep that determination, even when things turn south. You have to keep believing in what you're doing. And yes, you got to be right about what you picked. But I think it's that determination that really separates the great entrepreneurs from all of us.
Well, you mentioned the pitch to Blockbuster and Wayne Huizinga, and you and I, before I pressed record, talked about that you'd be willing to share some pitch disasters in your career that were very painful at the time, but obviously lessons learned. So I'd love to hear a story or two from a pitch disaster.
Yeah, if I ever write a book, Jeff, the book I'm going to write is going to be on pitch disasters. I think people are interested in that, in advertising and marketing, but I think we're also all in businesses where at times we're pitching something, and so you know what that feels like. First off, I love pitches because they're very team-oriented, and you work as a team, and you're under pressure, and it's competitive, and you try to make the best of it you can. Probably the worst thing I do, Jeff, is I like to blow off steam in those very tense moments by telling the team all of the disaster pitches stories that I can think of. And my team, whenever we do that, they will always groan and say, please, no more. I don't want any of those. We're about to pitch something. We're going to try to win something. Don't tell me all the bad things that happened. But they're usually so funny. I love them. One in particular, and I think I can mention the name because it was so long ago. It was, probably 15 years ago. But Denny's was looking for a new restaurant, a new advertising agency for their new management team that they had. They had a new management team. They came to Kansas City, here where our offices were. One of the first things, although I'll tell you a couple disasters in that pitch that I think are funny, but one of the funniest is when they walked into the room. You're socializing with them. You're saying hi. You're getting to know them. You usually have some food or some drinks just before you sit down. And the new CEO of the company was a woman who went up to, my dad was in that pitch at the time, and I was right next to him when we pitched this one. And she walked up to him while we were, mingling and getting seated. And she said, Bob, nice to see you. Do you remember me? My dad is a very honest person. He's a very transparent and honest person. And he kind of paused for a minute. I remember it like it was yesterday. And he goes, kind of shook his head and said, no, I don't remember you. And she said, Bob, I used to work for you. I was a Bernstein-Rein associate. And This was not a failure on my dad's part. This was a failure on our part for not doing the research that's required when you go into a new business pitch. Everybody today listening to this will say, well, of course you'd research before you did. For whatever reason, we didn't. It turned out this woman had worked for us. I can't remember her name. I wish I could. She had worked for us, now to be fair, in our Denver office. We represented McDonald's and we represented them in Denver, and we did have a Denver office, and she ran that Denver office for us. But obviously, we were not going to do well in the pitch after she walked in and had worked for us for years,
Yeah.
and we didn't remember her. I mean, that was not good. But in that same pitch, I love this part of the story. You said you've been to our offices here in Kansas City. We're in a high-rise building. It's a nice building. We're not the only tenant, but we're on the top floors. And we're at the end of this same pitch, and a lot of things went bad in that pitch, by the way, which makes me laugh. But one of the things was we were asking them, well, what is it that'll make you more successful? And their answer was an okay answer. It wasn't a great answer, but they said, well, we're going to work harder than the group that came before us. This was them saying it. And we will stay late, and we will always work, and we're going to work till we have the answers. And that means it's not a 9 to 5 job. And at 8 o'clock, we're still going to be in the office. And that's who we expect from our ad agency. We want you to be working just as hard, and we want you to be, just as dedicated and work the long hours that we're working. Well, of course, you're trying to win the business. So our answer was right then, and we were pitching this thing in the afternoon. We said, well, we absolutely will work as hard as you do, and we never end at 5. We keep going, until the job's done. And right as we were saying that, it was probably 5 o'clock in the evening as we're wrapping up the pitch. The whole building made a sound like the Starship Enterprise turning off. And every light, every air conditioning system, everything in the building went down at 5 o'clock, as if 5 o'clock, day's over, pack up, I don't know why you're here. And it was just a bad coincidence. We did work late hours in those days, and
Right.
but it was very dramatic. And like I said, it was like the Starship Enterprise going down. But
Well,
anyhow,
that's funny.
yeah, it is a good one. I had this is just a personal thing, but pitches go on, they're usually 2 or 3 hours long, and this could happen to anybody, but it happened to me. I had to go to the bathroom so badly. I mean, I thought I was going to pee in my pants, but there was no chance. There's an intermediary in our business called Search Consultants, and they run the review. And particularly as you get to the end of the pitch, they're building up to ask the very important questions. How dedicated are you going to be? Who's going to be on the team? All that stuff. I couldn't leave, but I could barely answer the questions because I felt like the urine coming out of my eyeballs. I mean, I had to go so badly, and then when you end the pitch in this particular one, you want to end casual, you want to end powerfully, and then you want to kind of hang around and shake hands and, be familiar and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I had to sprint to the restroom, and I'm surprised I didn't burst in that pitch.
Oh my God.
But
That's crazy.
and I'll give you one other one that I like a lot, or I could give you more if you want those too. But we were pitching, I think it was Big Lots. It was Big Lots, and this happens today, and you even warned me before, or your notes did before we get on this interview. Make sure you turn off your phones, because it would be bad for this interview for the phone to go off. It would be bad in a new business pitch for a phone to go off. So again, I like to keep things loose and everything, but for some reason I decided I'm going to be really dictatorial here to my team before this pitch to Big Lots. I know we're going to hear from the CEO, so I made a big point to my whole entire team. Your phones have to be off. Make sure everybody's phone is off. I don't want to hear if somebody's phone goes off, that's going to be, a terminable offense. It's the worst thing that could ever happen. Put your phones away and make sure they're off. And I made a big deal, biggest deal I've ever made about it. And sure enough, in the pitch, it started with the CEO giving his speech about the state of the business. And he was somebody who commanded respect, and he didn't want things interrupted. It was a formal deal. And sure enough, in the middle of that pitch, a phone starts going off, and I'm pissed. I can't believe it. I told my team not to have a phone go off, and here a phone is going off, and he's looking around. He's not happy. I'm showing him that I'm not happy. But what I realize is everybody's bag, we gave away monogram bags to everybody for their anniversary, so we all had monogram bags. Mine had SAB, Stephen Aaron Bernstein, on it. The phone that's ringing was, of course, my bag. It was my phone that I didn't turn off. Now, I'm not an idiot. I want to make sure that he doesn't realize it's my phone just out of embarrassment. So I go to that bag, I pick it up like it's a radioactive dog poo, and I, hold it at arm's length, and I literally moved it outside of the room so that I could show how
Right.
disgusted I was that the phone was ringing. But the truth was I just moved it out because I didn't want people to know that was my phone that was going off. And
Oh my God.
we did not win Denny's, nor did we win Big Lots, nor did we win the one that I had to pee so badly in. So those have been some, but there's some really funny ones.
So what was your transition back into the actual Bernstein-Rein agency, and when did you take over being the CEO?
Yeah. So Bernstein-Rein had been growing quite a bit in the early 90s because Walmart was growing and Blockbuster was growing. And I was in Albuquerque, and we had built that operation up pretty good and over 100 stores. But Bernstein-Rein had never had a head of operations. They'd never had anybody who was just making sure the systems in Bernstein-Rein worked really, really well. That was a good way to bring me into the company. So even though I worked for the family business, our Blockbuster stores were different from the advertising agency. We were actually a client of we were a client of the agency. Our own franchise was, and but it made sense for me to come back to Kansas City. My dad knew, and I knew at that point, at some point I would want to be president of the agency, and I'm now CEO. But we knew back then that, and again, this was the mid-'90s, that there needed to be some transition for me to become president. So I came into the agency as an operations manager. What that means in an advertising agency, primarily back then, is I really ran our studio, I ran our print production, I ran our television producers. So it was more of not the ideas and the words and it was not the ideas and the concepts and the campaigns. It was more of the everyday things that needed to be done that were very, very important, that had to be done efficiently and on time and for quality. And so I came into the agency that way. And it was a good way to come into the agency. I was not chief operating officer. I was just manager of operations, which we hadn't had before. And my job was to make sure that once we got to great ideas and great campaigns, that we were able to move those forward into the executions really, really well. It was a good way to come in because I got to learn kind of the groundworks of the agency. I didn't start on, in the coming up with campaigns. I didn't start managing client relationships. I started on the ground level, which really was a thing that my dad had taught me going back to even internships and Blockbuster. If you're going to do this stuff, you need to start at the ground level. And I told you before, even in the Blockbuster story, I started by checking people out. Even with a law degree and MBA, my job was to recommend movies and charge you $3 for a video. It was really the same theory in advertising. I came over in operations.
I have to ask you this question since I have the CEO of one of the leading ad agencies in Kansas City. So in multiple job searches, there were times I tried to work for an ad agency. And over the course of my career, working at Sprint and Bayer, Crop Science, and various other companies, I worked with, J. Walter Thompson and Carlson Marketing Group and VML, Valentine Radford back in the day. When I was at Bayer, but ad agency seems to have a bias to hire people that only have ad agency experience. Can you explain that strategy?
Yeah. Well, I think the good news, Jeff, I think that's changed some now. If it hasn't, it should. But without a doubt, I think agencies, because they were running so fast, or they felt they were running so fast, they didn't want to bring people in from outside the agency world and take on the responsibility of training them. I mean, I said I came into an agency in operations, but I would say operations are not the strength of marketing and communications groups. Marketing and communication about the ideas and the concepts, and we got to make bold words and great ideas. And I don't have time I'm saying this is the bias to not hiring somebody who understands the agency business. I think it was just a short-sightedness in thinking that you had to have that before you came in. And it definitely is a short-sightedness because what makes a great agency is having unique ideas and having outside perspective and those things don't just come from people who had marketing degrees and agency degrees and have 3 to 5 years working in another agency. But that bias has existed for a long time, and I'd say still exists, but I think it's being chipped away at now because
Yeah.
there is so much more that creative thinkers, regardless of where you've worked or what your education is, can bring to an agency.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
Yeah.
but we've
Thank you.
definitely have had that bias. Jeff, if you tried to work for Bernstein-Rein and we didn't bring you in, that's our mistake if that
No,
happened.
I don't. I'm pretty sure I did not try to work at Bernstein-Rein, but I was in a lot of job transitions, so
Yeah.
I can't guarantee that, but I'm pretty sure not.
Yeah.
Steve, I know you're CEO. What's it like leading an independent agency with all the agency consolidation and the conglomerates out there, and
Yeah.
what's that like, and what are the challenges for you?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that is the challenge today. And first off, I will say I don't think this just in the agency business anymore, but private equity seems to own everything today. I'm amazed in the agency world it's happening, and I'll get to that because that's your question. But every client we're talking to, where it used to be you're talking to, the shareholders, the decision makers, whatever. No, they most often today have to report back to private equity as well. And I think that has changed things. But in the agency world, I think it has changed things because one, I do get jealous of the fact private equity is there to grow a business. And so they've got dollars and resources to grow a business. And so if you get acquired by private equity or get as an agency or get an investment in private equity, they want to see you grow and they're going to give you the resources to grow disciplines or to acquire other shops. So as an independent, I'm jealous of those resources that people have. But at the same time, I'm proud of the fact that we stay independent because we're not being, of course, we want to grow. We're a business as well. But as an independent agency, I'm able to focus on my clients. I'm able to focus on what your needs are, often even at the expense of our own financials. McDonald's, I said we represented for 55 years. Not every one of those 55 years was profitable for Bernstein-Rein representing McDonald's. But as a whole, the 55 years was wonderful and amazing. I don't think you get that latitude when you are owned by private equity. You have to deliver every time, every quarter, every year, every account, and you're not able to make those investments in clients, and you're not able to make those investments in people either. I think when you get into conglomerates and when you get into private equity ownership, and again, I think there are a lot of good things about that. It's just not our model. And again, I'm jealous of the resources that they have because they do have a lot of resources. But they start going after efficiency, and they spend their time reorging the agencies, reorging the organization. We spend our time on our culture and our people and trying to really be in tune with our clients. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages, but it's definitely something that's going on right now in the agency world. And there are major agencies that you probably worked with that don't exist anymore. Major names, from FCB, Donor. They're just left and right. They're being absorbed, and legacy brands are disappearing. And I don't think that's good for our industry. I think diversity of thought and independence is something that needs to remain.
Yeah, no, I agree. You mentioned culture. I would love to get your thoughts on, what is the culture in your mind at Bernstein-Rein? What things are you doing to improve it and drive a great culture?
Well, Bernstein-Rein was founded by my dad and a guy named Skip Rain. Both are still around and get involved from time to time. I think the principles that they started it with are really the same ones that we have now made programmatic in what we do. And so we have 6 things that we live by. And when I say them, you'll know them as soon as I say them, but we can also go deep in them. Family is number 1. We're a family organization. We treat people like family members. Independent, we just talked about. We like working for one group, and that's our client. We do the right thing for our client. Entrepreneurial, we talked about that too. We want people to try to understand the balance between risk and reward. Community, we think it's important that you get involved in the community that you exist in. We want people to have passion for this business. We don't want it to just be a job. We want it to be something that you really like doing. You don't have to be a cheerleader, but if you hate coming in every day and you can't wait to leave, you really owe it to the people around you and to yourself to say, this might not be the industry or even the agency for me. Maybe I'll be happier at some other place. And then the final thing for us is, and it actually came when we lost the Walmart account. We represented Walmart for 33 years, and that was our biggest piece of business, and we had 60 people on it. And when we lost the business, we said, well, who are we now if we aren't Walmart? And we went into some real introspective things, and we filled up a creative room with all these things that we could stand for. And there was 2 letters that were on the wall that weren't the big buildup. They were in there, but it just struck such a chord for all of us. And they were the letters BR. BR for Bernstein-Rein, but in this presentation stood for being real. And we said, being real, that's who we are. That's who Bernstein-Rein is. We're about being transparent, being authentic, doing real assignments, talking in very real terms. We're not trying to be, the castle on the hill. We want to be very real people. So those 6 attributes really were the same things that, even though we discovered one when we lost Walmart, those 6 attributes, our cultural pillars, were the ones that Bob and Skip started the business with in 1964, but we codified them probably about 20 years ago. And now every new employee that we bring in, I spend a half an hour with going in their first week, going over just those core values. And we always say to them, they are easy to say and easy to understand. They're actually hard to live up to. But we really make it a point that when things become confusing, when things don't seem right, you can go back to those 6 things. And if we're not living up to those, you should call us out on it. And we consider ourselves a culturally driven shop. And it's really those 6 things, and they're on our walls. We say them to everybody. We want them to live them, but we also want them to develop them on their own too, and make them theirs, particularly when you get into family and independent and entrepreneurial. That's about making the place your own, and we want that. So it really becomes a core thing for us. We spend a lot of time on culture.
What are your thoughts, Steve, in terms of kind of when you started at Bernstein-Rein till, fast forward till today, in terms of how the clients or prospects have changed in terms of, what their responsibilities are and, the pressures on them. And if you want to if COVID accelerated or it had a further impact, but what have you seen from start to finish?
I'll start with the negative things because then I'll try to end with positive, because I don't want to be all negative. But I think there's a few things. One, and some of this goes a little bit before me, but I definitely even saw it happening as I joined in the 90s. Marketing used to be something that companies would outsource. They would, your marketing and advertising came from outside your walls. You were in charge of the product, you were in charge of the service, but you would have your experts outside the walls. This isn't a bad thing, but companies now have full marketing arms within their groups. As you mentioned, you were in many. And so that expertise isn't just in our, sitting on our side, it's sitting on your side too. And that has changed things some. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but you're not revered. Like if people used to watch, if you watched Mad Men before and you'd see how the agency.
Love Mad Men.
Yeah.
Love it.
Best show ever. And some funny things in that show that are still true today. But agencies were revered then because the companies themselves didn't have that expertise. Well, today, companies have that expertise. And in some cases, they can be even more talented than what you have. But they don't have all the experiences that you've had collectively. So that's one thing. But I think the other thing is, and we've both been a part of this business too, I do like that the world is more measurable now. You can measure almost anything, and that means you can look for real results, and I think that's a very good thing and a very important thing. But I do think it can be overstated too. I see this in Super Bowl ads. If you look at what might be called the classic era of advertising or the classic ads that you remember, most of those ads were done by marketing people on both sides, on the company side and the agency side, who had just a gut feel and a really good feel for their clients and their customers and what motivated them. And that enabled them to take risks in creative and campaigns. And they did. And there were brilliant things that people said based on hunches of very brilliant people. Now, there are also failures in that too, in that era. But today, I think because we lean so much on everything has to be measurable, and again, I don't think all that's bad because every business should be held accountable, but because we lean so much on that, I think some of that high flying, I'm going to take a gamble, I'm going to show you something brilliant, I think some of that's missing right now. And you see some of that in like the quality of Super Bowl ads. I think you can look now and see the strategies and the lack of risk taking in Super Bowl ads. And I think that's because of the measurability. The other negative that I'd say is what I talked about before. I don't know if you have, well, you do still have the great entrepreneurs, but they are fewer and farther between, because I do think private equity, which again is not all bad, but is running a lot of what goes on. And so the people that you're now reporting to within a company, they have just as much pressures or more than they had before, because they don't just have to deliver to themselves and to the consumer. They've got to deliver to private equity who wants to see growth, 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 growth. The result of that has been not looking at the horizon, looking at the immediate. In relationships, it's been that loyalty isn't what it was before. We've had relationships that lasted for 55 years, for 33 years, for 20 years. We still have a very good tenure with our clients, but I don't feel loyalty the same way that we did before then. And I think that's a shame, because I think in a creative field, I think getting good work also comes from the trust that comes in a relationship. And if there's no trust, it's very difficult to be as creative as you could be. So I think that part is a shame. Now, I'll say things that are good. There are still very good and bright people in this business. And in marketing, whether you're on the agency side or on the client side, it's usually very interesting people with quirks and strange and funny things about them, but that's what makes the world interesting. And I still think people look for, even though I just said there's less risk taking, I still think big ideas are still big ideas. And when they're true and everybody knows it, that's a great feeling on both sides. And so those things are all true. The last thing, because you mentioned COVID, that I'll say that has changed, and I think this is probably for the better, but it's definitely changed things, is the idea of remote work and actually not being face-to-face all the time. Well, physically face-to-face with people is now accepted because of COVID. There's some good things about that. Good things are new business pitches used to be very, very expensive, as you'd spend multiple trips with multiple people to various parts in the country, to pitch a campaign or to pitch prospect. Today, many will allow that to be over Zoom. Now, we prefer it to be face-to-face, but it is more cost-effective to do it over Zoom or Teams or whatever. But also the same is true with where you can hire your talent. We like to have talent where we can physically touch and be together because we're a team sport. But sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes there's great talent anywhere in the world, certainly anywhere in the country. And you can now hire remote employees and they can engage with you face-to-face, although not physically, in ways that you couldn't do before. And even though that was happening before COVID, it's now accepted after COVID. If I tell a client your account management person is living in Minneapolis, even though we're headquartered in Kansas City, today that's not a big deal to people. Before COVID, that would have been a big deal.
Yeah. Steve, thank you so much for coming on the Corporate Couch. I'm so honored, and this was a great conversation. And I look forward to meeting you in person over coffee or maybe a bobblehead night at the stadium.
That's right. Well, that would be great, Jeff. And really, it's me that's honored. So you've had some amazing guests, and you've had so many interesting interviews. I just hope this came off as interesting.
God, I just love talking to Steve. He's so good. I mean, it's like a walk back into kind of the old school ad agency days. And, his father was an iconic ad person, started Bernstein-Rein in, I think, 1964. And it was just crazy. Like, I used to read the cereal boxes.
I did too. Yeah. My brother and I both. We would line them all up on the table and read every one of them. It was great.
And just to think, why didn't my father take that idea of me reading the cereal box and create the Happy Meal.
Happy Meal.
Yeah, like that with legendary. So Steve was the impetus for the Happy Meal.
As a 10-year-old.
As a
10-year-old, he invented Happy Meals.
Just the iconic brands they worked with and the founders of those brands with, some of the younger generation might not even know their names, but Sam Walton of Walmart, Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, Henry Block, the founder of H&R Block, Wayne Huizinga, the founder of a lot of things, but Blockbuster in this case. Talk about crazy stuff. Steve, one of the things they did, one of their family businesses was they were the largest franchisee of Blockbuster chain. So, Blockbuster was crazy, big. I think it was 70% of the U.S. population was within 5 or 10 miles from a Blockbuster location. You could tell about his leadership style and what he thought about his person. He turned down, Blockbuster offers to go to the Playboy Mansion and going to the Oscars because he thought, well, you're spending all this money. Why don't you do other things with the money, make things better, lower the cost of goods or whatever. I don't need to go to the Playboy Mansion. Now, I don't know if I would be in my late 20s or 30s or whatever
I don't know
age
what
it
I would
was.
have done.
I would have been going.
I've never been invited to the Playboy Mansion. I think there's a better chance that I would have gone to the Oscars. I think I would have enjoyed that, definitely.
Yeah, no, yes, love that. And how his family was silent when watching football games during the commercials. They would talk while the game was on because they were brought up to watch the commercials.
And he thought that was normal. It had to be a friend of his that came over to watch a game with him, point that out to them.
How he was a lawyer for a law firm for 90 days, and they said his ties were too bright, so he's probably not
your ties
for
are
me.
too bright.
Oh man, there was so much good stuff. I mean, and how the Blockbuster demise, how well known they were. They were top logo brands of the world at the time, and they were so well known, but they lived on their laurels and they became non-relevant because they didn't look into. They could have been the Netflix. They could have been, Walmart.
It could have been a contender.
Could have been a contender, but I mean, there's so much good stuff. Joe, what did you take out of the episode? It was so funny.
You could have literally just put a microphone in front of his mouth and said, Steve, start talking. I don't care, whatever. You'd actually mentioned this towards the end of the interview. You said, you promised me that you were going to tell me some pitch stories, some pitch disaster.
Right.
Don't you think he has a few of them?
Oh my God. It's so great too. I mean, great.
And every one of them were disaster stories, So you kind of wonder, what was the first pitch for the Happy Meal, or what was the first pitch for Make It a Blockbuster Night or something like that. But no, he talks about the ones where his phone goes off during the pitch, or where he has to go to the bathroom during the pitch or something like that.
Yeah, literally. And he was usually a laid back type of person, but for some reason during this pitch, he told everybody, make sure no phone goes off during the presentation. Oh, no phones. Make sure your phones are shut off. And then the client CEO is talking about all this stuff in the middle of a speech and all this, and the phone's going off, and he's thinking, whose phone is that? What? And it's his phone. So he forgot to turn his phone off.
Picks up the bag and puts it out in the hallway or something like that. I don't know, whoever's phone is. And the thing that makes things like that so funny is because they're so true, because every one of us has been in a pitch of some sort, and not usually maybe not with an ad agency, but something where you're pitching a project to your boss or to the company or to the department or something like that, and things go bad or things go well. It just kind of depends.
Yeah, and they had that other pitch where one of the executives of the client company, or soon to be hopefully client company, the woman had actually ran the Bernstein-Rein Denver office, and no one did the research too.
Don't you think that would have been something that would have come up in some of the research?
Right. Don't you remember me? Oh, you worked for us. They didn't get that client, obviously. But no, I got to talk to Steve forever. Maybe,
well, let's have him back. Let's have him back.
Yeah,
and
two martini lunch maybe.
Pick up where you left off. Pick up where you left off and have him again, because it was.
And talk bobbleheads.
And talk bobbleheads.
Bobblehead collection.
With the Beatles and the Royals and the Italian Heritage Night at the Royals. It's the interview that just keeps giving.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
So many good things. Joe, what's going on in your life right now?
Well, you know, because we've discussed this, that we don't do the video on these little outro things that we do, but if we did, people would notice that my hair is getting longer. Let me tell you the story about why my hair is like that too, because I'd gone to the same barber, and you have too, gone to the same barber for 30 years, like that. Mm-hmm. And one day, a while ago, my barber said he can't cut my hair any longer. I said, why not? And he said, well, you can only cut it shorter.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.